All right, good morning. Once again, welcome to Indiana IEP Resource Center Series, Conversation with Authors. My name is Marcy Wilburn, and I'm the project coordinator with the center. We are so excited today to welcome Mirko Chardin, co-author of Equity by Design, Delivering on the Power and Promise of UDL. Let's start today with some logistics. Please know that all microphones have been muted and all webcams are disabled for participants. However, throughout the session, we encourage you to post general comments and questions within the chat box. We will refer to those questions at the end of the session and make sure that all those questions are answered before we conclude today. In order to access the chat box, click on the bottom toolbar, type in your comment or question, and then the option to post either just to panelists or to everyone within the webinar will be presented. Select the down arrow and make the selection of whether you want to present either to panelists or everyone within the session. Also, today's session will be captioned. To enable the captions, click on the closed captioning button in the lower toolbar. If you have any technical difficulties today, I went ahead and added my email into the chat box, and I would be happy to help you if needed. At this time, I'll pass it over to Mirko to start the conversation about his book. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you all this morning. And I promise this is not going to be me just talking at you. I have some content to share. Then it's really going to be important that this is an interactive session. I always say to folks that the most important learning takes place when we as educators are able to engage in rich conversation with each other, which means it's okay to push back. It's okay to share our own thinking. So again, I'm just going to share some slides to get us going, just to share some basic information about the text Equity by Design. And then I'm hopeful that we'll have a really authentic conversation. And I'd love to see some of your thinking and some of your questions. Now, I always bring with me the same 4 norms or agreements, expectations, for folks who are engaging with me. And these actually don't come from my text. They actually don't come from me. They're authored by Glenn Singleton as a part of his Courageous Conversations About Race. And they simply are to stay engaged. We have a real brief time together. I am sure there's a lot of other things contending for your attention, but I promise if we dig in and we're authentic with each other, this brief micro moment this morning will be powerful. As I mentioned prior to this slide, it's going to be important in order for it to be powerful that you speak your truth with no shame, blame, or judgment. Again, it's okay to push back. It's okay to ask questions. The most powerful learning takes place when we are able to dig in with each other and create adult learning spaces, even if it's in micro form via this webinar this morning. Certainly, when we engage in this work, we should plan to experience discomfort. It doesn't mean that anything bad has taken place. It simply means that we are being pushed beyond the limits of our current operating models or of our comfort zones. And certainly when we address identity, race, class, things that sometimes are taboo or considered taboo within the context of our society, it is both normal and natural to experience discomfort. In fact, I typically add the folks, if no discomfort is experienced, it's probably because we weren't authentically speaking our truths. And certainly, last but not least, we should plan to expect and accept non-closure. What I mean by that is it's okay to leave with more questions than answers. This work is about a journey, not a destination. So if we're leaving with more questions than answers, if the concepts are resonating, if we're continuing to research, discuss them, bring them up with colleagues, it means that they've made an impact that's been significant. And that's what the work should totally be all about. Quick about me, my name is Mirko Chardin. I'm currently in the capacity of being the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Novak Education. Prior to, I spent 2 decades as a school leader in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The last 10 years or so, I was the founding head of school of the Putnam Ave Upper School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a middle school that was founded and revolved around the notion of universally designing, providing an equitable experience, and ensuring that all of our kiddos were seen and heard. I'm also an active hip hop artist, and I always share that when I engage in these conversations with educators, because I like to share with folks that, this work is about ensuring that we center around the human experience and that the individual, the person that you are in your personal life, is actually the same person that you are in your professional life. Sometimes we put on the personas of being Mr. or Mrs. whoever we introduce ourselves as educators, and lose sight of the fact that the same value systems, norms, experiences that we carry in our personal lives, they're with us in our professional lives as well. Because in the words of John Dewey, school's not a rehearsal for life. It's real life. It's the real lived experience of our kiddos. It's your real lived experiences. And hopefully, through entering into spaces with courage and conviction, we can ensure that our educational journeys and our learning spaces truly reflect the fact that they're happening in the real world right now, and that is valuable time and valuable experience that we should center around. Now, for me, another huge component of the work is acknowledgement of the fact that access alone is certainly not equity. Access alone is not enough to be able to create circumstances that are truly going to support all of the young scholars who are dependent upon us. And I always start conversations here because I believe that the world that we've been living in for the past 2 or 3 years, the world of this pandemic and whatever's been happening within the context of our society, has almost made the notion of access a buzzword within the context of education. You know, the assumption that if all we do is find the right resources, that all of our scholars will succeed, that they will flourish. Although I am here to trouble the waters and say that that's not the case, that, you know, our young scholars, our kiddos, they're not static beings. They're not inanimate objects. If we're truly going to meet their needs and create circumstances that reflect the fact that we're treating them with respect and dignity, and we honor who they are, we are required to go above and beyond access in order to do this. And I will explain what I mean as we enter into the next slide. Now, when I talk about equity, I'm not talking about a static or a flat thing. I'm talking about something that has multiple components. As is communicated on the slide that we're looking at. When I think about providing equitable experiences, to our young folks, I'm truly talking about providing them with equitable access to inclusive classrooms with grade level peers. So we're not talking about siloing out our young people. And when we say inclusive classrooms, we're not talking about a circumstance of just saying, hey, they're present in the room. We're talking about intentionally being proactive in designing journeys and experiences that ensure that each and every single one of our young people have the opportunity to be included and to access appropriately what's being put in front of them as they engage with grade level peers. We're talking about equitable opportunities to learn aligned to grade level standards, holding all of our young people to the same high expectations. We don't change targets or trajectories because when we change targets, we change trajectories. And our young people always land exactly where we expect them to. So we always want to ensure that there are opportunities that are aligned to grade level standards that are appropriate for them, that they're certainly experiencing equitable expectations that they can be successful when they're provided with us, that they know that we believe in them, not just because of what we say, but because of what's been evidence that allows them to know that we trust that they will be successful. And certainly this cannot happen if they're not equitable feelings of belongingness or hope that's in that space. Now, what I have to offer to you this morning, 3 questions that comprise a framework that I refer to as the Going Beyond Access framework. And I believe if we're able to, as educators, to wrestle with the questions that comprise this challenging framework, we'll be able to begin the work of going above and beyond access so that we can always design learning spaces and journeys that reflect our young people and ensure that we're communicating that we believe in them, that we trust them, and that these are safe and welcoming spaces that have intentionally been designed, not by chance, but intentionally been designed to communicate to our young people that we believe in them and that they will thrive when they are with us. Now, these questions are challenging. And the first one is, are we valuing impact over intent? What I mean by that is, are we valuing the impact of our decision-making as it manifests in the hearts, minds, and lives of the young people who are dependent upon us? Or is it a circumstance where we simply hang our hats on the notion of intent because we believe that we are good people, who's sacrificing time and energy to pour into the lives of others, but we are not aware of what it looks like or feels like to be on the receiving end of our decision making. Well, I'm here to lift up the fact that the work is always about impact and not intent. I can, for example, jump in my car, jump on the highway or freeway, have every intention of following all the rules of the road, drive with both hands on the steering wheel, pay very close attention, have my music turned down so there are no distractions, because I have every intention of following all the rules of the road, of not getting into an accident and safely making it to my destination. Yet despite those intentions, somebody cuts me off in the blink of an eye, fraction of the moment. I rear end somebody. I'm in an accident. I didn't intend it, yet I am still in a circumstance in which I am responsible for the impact of that circumstance, for the harm that's been committed. See, intent is not required in order, or good intent is not required, rather, in order for there to be a positive impact. And our work does not rest simply on our intentions, on our hopes, on our wishes. It manifests or revolves around what it looks like and feels like to be a learner who's in our classroom spaces. We need to always take into consideration that the learning journey, it's not about us. No, we are educators who are employed by a district, by a system, as facilitators who are facilitating the learning journey of another individual. So we truly always have to be mindful of how our decisions and actions show up in their lives, because the work is about impact and not about intent. Next question: can all of our learners see themselves reflected in our work? Is it a circumstance where we say all means all, while implicitly sending a message that some of our learners are invisible because they never see themselves reflected in materials, in educators, or even in the concepts that we discuss? And this is not about an act of kindness or an act of politics. This is truly learning lessons and taking into consideration the decades and decades of data that we have as a result of some breakthroughs and discoveries in the field of neuroscience that communicate to us that our brains seek evidence of representation in order to not trigger our normal and natural safety threat detection system. And what I mean by that is our amygdala. You know, when our young people enter into our school buildings, when they engage with us, even if it is virtually, if they do not see evidence of the fact that we believe that individuals that hail from whatever their identity marker is have been successful in the past, have contributed to our society, are continuing to contribute to our society, therefore reinforcing the belief that we believe that they can contribute to our society. If that is not the case, then it is challenging for our learners to show up, connect, and be safe and access the learning journeys that we have for them. And this is not just about young people or youth culture. This applies to all human beings. And if we had the opportunity to dig in to some neuroscience, I would share with you some of the data that's not new. We have decades and decades of it that communicate that we need to ensure that our learners see themselves reflected in order for them to bloom and blossom and show us the full magnitude of the potential that they contain. Third question, and it is certainly as big and as rich as the others, and it simply asks, is the work authentically relevant? And I would add, to whom? Not to you as the facilitator of the learning journey, but to the learners who are sitting in seats before you. And I love sharing with educators. Some of my learning over the past 2 or 3 years has been that authentic relevance, it's fleeting in my own life as an adult. And I say this because what was once authentically relevant to me in January of the year 2020 was not the same things that still had a sense of authentic relevance to me in March and April of that same year, as the pandemic picked up speed and closures started to take place. Nor are those the same elements that are authentically relevant to me today in June of the year 2022. And if I take into consideration the fact that my youth, my young people, the learners, the scholars, the kiddos who are dependent upon us, they live in a world that moves at a pace that's even faster than that of an adult. They live in a world that's completely driven by advances in technology and the trends on the internet and social media spaces. And if I take that into consideration and I wrestle with this framework, kind of dovetailing back to that first question of valuing impact over intent, I'll realize that when I engage with young people and I say things that I think are an act of kindness, like, hey, please pay attention, please engage, this work, this material, it's going to be relevant. It's going to be important when you grow up. It's going to be important like 10 years from now. Just hang in right now. Now, if I understand what I am asking of a young person, and if I take into consideration that if I'm saying something like this to somebody who's 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14 years old, I'm actually asking them to engage in this high level abstract thinking. Because I'm essentially asking them to believe that if they live just as long as they may be alive today, that somehow this work, this information will have some salience, importance, meaning, or relevance in their lives. And if any of the young people that you work with are anything like what I was like when I was a student or when I was a scholar, when I heard those words, I would have just realized that I was given permission to disconnect, to disengage, because I would have realized that you do not understand what's important in my world and life right now, that you do not understand my experience. And if you're letting me know that if I live just as long as I've been alive today, that maybe in some distant future, this work will have meaning or significance, then my reply to you would have been, okay, thanks for letting me know. I will figure this out in the future. I live in a world where I have Alexa, Siri, Google, and all these resources. They will help me out. Thank you for letting me know that this work is not important right now. And now, pro tip for any who are wrestling with these questions for the first time, the only way that we authentically respond to or find answers to these going beyond access questions are through hearing the voices of those we serve, through hearing the voices of our young people. We can only authentically assess and make sense of the impact that we have on another individual through hearing their voice. Yes, we may have resources that provide us with some assumptions, some good assumptions, maybe. We may think that they're good assumptions on what we believe the impact to be, but in the absence of their voice, there's still only an assumption. We can only get an authentic sense of whether or not our young people feel reflected in our spaces and our content and in the learning by hearing their voices on this. And we only can authentically get a sense of what is relevant, what has significance, what has meaning in the lives of our young scholars through hearing their voices. See, the work is not about us, it's about them. And it's about our ability to create spaces that reflect them so that their learning journey can be powerful, can be appropriate, and can be one that truly reflects some of the values of the educational framework and universal design for learning. And I promise I will unpack this slide quickly. Then I want to pivot to hearing from you. I want to pivot to your questions and your reactions. But I'll just share quickly, if you're not familiar with universal design for learning, it's an educational framework. It's adaptive work. It's a set of principles, beliefs, values. It's how we perceive the work, our role in the work, and how we perceive our young people. You know, it is not about blindly implementing strategies without taking into consideration who we are, how we're doing the work, or who the recipients of that work are. And UDLers, as I call individuals who embrace this framework, typically have three foundational tenets. First and foremost, the acknowledgement that variability is the rule, not the exception. Difference is always present. Brain science communicates this to us. So whether or not we believe we see difference in regards to ability levels, preferences, identities, or who our young people are, we plan to encounter difference. We don't wait until we see it to take it into consideration. We know that difference is always in play, so we proactively, as we design learning experiences, take that into consideration. We also believe that all of our young people can work towards the same firm goal and grade level standards. What that means is we hold all to the same high expectations. We don't change targets. I said this a moment ago, because when we change a target, we change a trajectory. And our young people land exactly where we expect them to. And foundational to this is the belief that all of our young people, all of them, not just the ones that you like, not just the ones that are your favorites, not just the ones that have advocacy, not just the ones that are labeled as talented and gifted, but all of our students will become expert learners if the barriers are removed. if the things that get in the way are removed, even if the things that have gotten in the way are our false biases and perceptions about their ability level or what they can do. And it's fascinating, I think, if you truly take these things into consideration, because truly, if we authentically believe that each and every single one of our learners has the potential to operate at expert level, if we remove barriers, then this communicates that our role as educators are not to pass judgment on which one of our kids has it or which ones don't. It's to create learning journeys that ensure that our young people are able to get to success, not by lessening the rigor of the work, but by ensuring that we take into consideration who they are, how we're communicating and framing journeys, and ensuring that we are designing proactively the environment and the learning journey in a manner that ensures that that young person gets that we believe in them and that we are scaffolding their journey in a way that ensures that they get to success, because we understand that they all have that potential. And as educators, it's our role to create circumstances that ensure that that potential is able to manifest itself. Y'all can tell I get really passionate about this work and I can go on and on about it. But I promised you this session was going to be interactive. I promised that I wanted to hear your voices. So I am actually going to exit out of my slideshow. I am going to stop the screen share and pivot to you. I want to hear what your reactions are. I want to hear what your questions are. And again, it's okay to push back. It's okay to disagree. We're going to have an adult learning space this morning. So I want you to dig in. I want you to be rich. Let's have some awesome conversation. I want to hear your thinking.
We actually already have a question in the chat already, so I will pose that one and feel free to answer. How can we best balance what is currently relevant in a student's present reality and honor that, but blend with what we know is important and relevant for his or her future?
I think that is a wonderful question. And I think the way that we do that is through ensuring that our young people are involved in the process. Know that they are not simply the recipients of some package that we've put together, but that we're designing our journeys in a way that communicate that they're not educational journeys that are being done to know our learners, but rather for and with them. This requires us as educators, to make space to hear the voices of our young people, which requires us to release ego and create space where we release some power, so that we can ensure that our young people are getting experiences that reflect the fact that school's not just supposed to be content for the sake of content, but we're truly supposed to be developing a sense of self-efficacy and independence within our young learners, because they're not supposed to be with us forever. So opportunities to engage in conversation with them, about what we think is important and what we know will have some significance, while hearing from them what their thoughts and interpretations are about what they're currently experiencing, I think, lift up, both the fragility, the vulnerability, of an awesome and robust learning environment.
That actually, there's a comment in the chat that students are always communicating. It's their education and should respond to their needs and experiences.
Absolutely. Agree with that 100%. It's easy sometimes in the environment that we're in as educators, with high stake testing, with politics, with pressure, to lose sight of the fact that our goal is never just content for the sake of content, but it's supporting our young learners and being ready to enter our society. Because like it or not, one day they are going to graduate and become decision makers with us. And even more frightening to some adults, one day they'll be in the driver's seat. They'll be making all the decisions, not just with us, but for us. So this is our opportunity to prepare them for that, not just for a love of content, although that is amazing and we want to instill that, but for an understanding that this is to equip them to make good decisions independently when they enter into our society.
Wonderful. I really like how you said that we have to see our educators and teachers employed as facilitators of other people's learning journey. And I just think as school leaders, how do we change the previous culture of it's your classroom and you're the teacher, you're the authoritarian in that classroom, to instead be a facilitator of someone else's learning journey? How do you instill that within the educators that you're hiring and that are within your buildings?
Well, I do believe it's challenging work, and it's one of the reasons why I love educational frameworks such as UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, which speak to the adaptive components of the work. Understanding that our mindsets and our expectations of ourselves, of our educational, institutions and our learners have to be taken into consideration before we begin the process of designing the work. Because if not, we enter in ways where there may be barriers, limitations, blind spots that have been left unchecked. And we have to take into consideration the fact that it's one of the reasons why I love this John Dewey quote, that school's not a rehearsal for life. It's often framed that way. It can be my classroom, my structure, because this is just practice. Lo and behold, it's not. It's the lived experiences of your young people. They will never get this time back. And you as an educator, you will never get this time back either. So let's ensure that our work is framed in the authentic lived experiences that are happening right now in real time as we're navigating the scary world, and our kiddos are as well, and not in the framework of assuming that this is just practice, this is just the dry run and they'll get it later, because that's not the case. I think if we embrace that, it reflects the fact that there's then urgency to try to get this right. And, with that sense of urgency, we can't let ourselves off the hook. We have to push past intent, take into consideration impact, and ensure that we're mindful of the fact that our young learners are the recipients of this journey we design. And if we design a journey that doesn't lead to positive outcomes for them, it's not because there's something inherently wrong with them. No, it's because we designed the journey that didn't meet their needs. In the same manner that if I ask a plumber to come to my home to fix pipes or something, if they're not able to stop the leak, I would be livid if they communicated that it's because I had some special types of pipes that, could not be fixed. No, the expectation would be that they would get the professional development they need, that they would consult with people they need, and that they would resolve the circumstance. That's what we expect the service providers in every other industry other than education. And it's time that we ensure that our industry reflects the fact that we are living in the real world, and there's vulnerability that comes with that, but it's okay. And if we embrace that, we can create better outcomes for our learners.
And I think that's what everybody's looking for, right? How do we improve these outcomes? We're all working very hard and spinning our wheels, but how are we doing it effectively? We have several other questions, so I'll move to the next one. How difficult is it for teachers and other educators to respond to students who have interest in things that are important to them when the educator doesn't see value in those things?
If the educator does not see value in those things, then I would say that the educator's perspective is a potential barrier. It is not about the educator feeling like their way is the only way. In fact, in the world of universal design, which is not just some educational initiative, universal design 30 to 40 years ago was adopted from the world outside of school, for educational context. So, as adults living in this society, we experience universal design on a regular basis. Universal design communicates to us that it's not about a one-size-fits-all approach, that your way is a way and not the only way. So if there are things that our learners value that the educator doesn't value, it's an opportunity for that educator to learn about different cultures and different experiences, and not to say, hey, because that's not what works for me, it's not going to be what works for you. Because again, we embrace the fact that this is about creating a powerful journey for other individuals in our ways. What worked for us might not be what works for everyone else. Because one size fit all has never truly worked, whether that's in dietary restrictions, clothing, whatever. There is a variability and difference that's always present. So we can't go into this assuming one size will work or one approach will work for all of our learners.
Another comment, I appreciate UDL. It is sometimes hard to shift teachers' mindsets to use it more because that's not how our standardized tests test students. and they are worried that kids won't pass. I try to facilitate to shift their minds to see the big picture. I'm glad that you reinforced the importance of this concept.
Now, I love that comment. I guess my reaction to it is, even in circumstances where we're taking standardized tests, you can still universally design circumstances for our kiddos. And it all starts with how we unpack our standards. Our standards always communicate. If we truly wrestle with them, how much flexibility we have in the design, of a learning journey or not. There are certain standards that are framed as what I call content standards that have ambiguous verbs and essentially communicate that it's up to the educator to assess or determine whether or not a young person has it. There are other standards that I frame as method standards, which explicitly communicate how learning will be assessed. If we're dealing with a content standard, great flexibility. It's up to the educator to decide. If we're dealing with a method standard, and those are typically what we see manifesting on standardized tests, the outcome is the same, but the journey in terms of methods, materials, and scaffolds, we have a great deal of flexibility in regards to figuring out that component. So my lens, it's always plausible for us to universally design. We have to take into consideration what the standard is, what the outcome is, and then we can actually design or plan the journey. One that may have great flexibility in regards to how we're assessing, or one that has flexibility in regards to how we're assisting young people in getting to a very specific destination, or showing that they've practiced or developed mastery around a very specific skill or skill set.
And I think that's exactly what we're trying to convey to teachers. Like, the more that you universally design on a day-to-day basis, then the more successful they're going to be on that standardized test, even at the end, if it is only a multiple choice test. So the way that you described that was exactly what we're trying to convey. You were just very much more eloquent in the way that you described that. We do have a couple more questions and comments. I don't know that we'll have time for all of them. Maybe pose one more and then I'll move on to the closing comments.
Sure.
Let's end on this one, just about, what do you think the first steps are when you have a teacher kind of moving from more of a teacher-centered experience and with a more focus on a student-centered experience? So what would you recommend some first steps are, practical steps for teachers to employ within their classrooms?
Wonderful question. I think the first thing to consider is, how will this teacher get voice or opinion from their young people, and what feels comfortable, okay for them? I frame it that way because sometimes I think when folks try this work, there are missteps in providing way too much freedom than they can handle at once. So I think perhaps thinking about what's okay for me to get for my young people to give me feedback on. What are types of things that I'm going to normalize hearing their voice on, so I can begin the process? I think it's about a journey and not a destination. So taking small steps is okay. Technical aspect, I would say always begin with unpacking your standards or objectives. Don't just assume that you know what they mean. Do you have a crystal clear narrative in your brain of what it looks like when a young person has gotten to mastery, of this standard? Once you have that, can you start thinking about what are barriers? What are limitations? What are things that might stop some of the learners in your class from being able to show that they know or can do whatever that standard requires? Then, third step, can you start thinking about what are things that you can do in your approach of design to remove those barriers or remove those limitations? That in essence is the process of universally designing. Certainly with more expertise and practice, we can go really deeper and broad with it, but it's essentially just ensuring that we know what it looks like when kids do this work well, that we've taken into consideration what might stop them from being able to do this work well, and that we have tried to proactively design pathways that ensure that those limitations that we've identified, that they're not things that actually stop our kids from getting to success. If we can normalize that, then we've normalized the kernels or the foundational elements of universally designing, so that it's not just teacher-centric.
Wonderful. I love that. And I have to end here with, on the back of the book, it says, just giving kids the opportunity to get the will, the skill, and the collective capacity to enact positive change. And I think that just captures the essence of this book and the work that you are doing alongside of Katie Novak and It's just so wonderful, and we appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you so much for taking time to answer everybody's questions within the session. We do have both an evaluation today that I will put within the chat for you to complete for us. And also we have a big winner of the book that we will send out. So Todd Hawks, you are our winner today. If you could go ahead and email me your mailing address, I will go ahead and drop this copy in the mail for you so that you can have that and read up on more about what Mirko is discussing within his book and within this session today. So thanks again for participating. And Mirko, thank you so much for being with us today.
It was an honor, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.